So we are going to have one workshop of an hour and a half, and then a break for about half an hour, and then another workshop. So let's give a big hand to Urmila, Devi, Dasi.
You can set that, you just put a phone here after you set it up. So this is March 14th, 2020 at the Sivananda Ashram in the Bahamas, and we're going to be looking at the yogic art of livelihood, and we're particularly looking at the problem with crossing fields. Nama Om Vishnu Praya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swami Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pacharni Nivasesa Nivani Paskhyade Satarani Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavam Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sagana Raganatam Vitam Samsajivam Sadvaitam Sadvadutam Parijana Sahita Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakam Vitamscha Vanchaka Patribhishcha Kipasandviyavata Patichanam Pavanevyo Vaishnavya Namo. So for those of you who weren't here yesterday, I'm just going to take a couple minutes to try to cover 3 hours worth of stuff. So you may feel a little lost for a while in this presentation today, but hopefully as we go through, things will become clearer. So in the Bhagavad Gita, the Bhagavad Purana, all the way back to the Rig Veda, all the way back to the beginning of the universe, careers have been divided into 4 main categories, which we're going to be calling fields of work. Now, this term fields of work is different than if you say I'm in the music field. It's not that kind of a field of work. We're looking at the different fields primarily in terms of their role in society, but also, especially as we're going to see in this session, in terms of their mood and their dharma. Now, these 4 fields have Sanskrit names, and the Sanskrit names refer to very complex, nuanced, and sort of difficult concepts. So we could have used the Sanskrit names, like we did with the 6 kinds of prosperity, but in this case, these Sanskrit words are very well known, and people may have a lot of wrong or pejorative concepts already associated with them. So my friend and co-author Ruchira Datta and I decided to come up with our own one-word translations for them. So keep in mind that we're using these terms in a very specific way in this context. So these are the fields of artistry, the fields of resources, the fields of government, the fields of ideas. The fields of artistry provides all of the function and beauty in society. And does anyone remember the questions that those in the field of artistry ask about their work? Is it supportive and is it beautiful? Those in the field of resources are the only ones generating wealth. They're taking natural resources, land, water, air, animals, and they're creating food, clothing, medicines, and so forth. These are the people in agriculture, business, trade, and what are the main questions that they ask about their work? Yes, is it sustainable and is it regenerative? And that doesn't just apply to ecology, but it applies if their own work is sustainable. Then the field of government, these are the people who take care of the needs of everyone in society. You can think of them as big parents. They make sure that everybody has food and clothing and water and electricity and, defense from crime, defense from enemies, and so forth. And this can be on the level of a nation, the level of a city, the level of an apartment building. It can be a police officer, firefighter, like that. It can also be people in NGOs, like people in the United Nations or other organizations like that. And these people are concerned with justice, fairness, and ethics in the society. And what are the main questions that they ask about their work? Is it just and is it honorable? Then we have the field of ideas. So these are the people who are disseminating wisdom, knowledge, guidance in the society. They like to play with language or mathematics. These are the teachers. Most doctors are in this category, religious leaders, researchers, and what are the main questions they ask about their work? Is it true and is it wise? So yesterday we looked at defining these four fields, and then we looked at the qualities of people who work in these fields. And we looked at those qualities in two categories: the inclination to work in those fields, which might show up, is likely to show up in childhood, but often when it shows up in childhood, it shows up in ways that people may criticize. Why do you mind everybody else's business? Why are you always telling everybody what to do? Why are you so focused and you don't notice anything else that's around you? Why are you trying to teach everybody? Why are you always drawing birds and looking out the window? So it may show up in a way that people criticize. And then we looked at the expertise in terms of Dharma, in terms of the Sanskrit sacred writings. What are the qualities of those who are expert in each of these four fields? And we did, in going through those qualities, we certainly touched upon, and a lot of you were asking questions about what happens when somebody who has the nature of one field works in another field. And this lens of what happens when somebody who has a nature in one field works in another field, Ruchira and I believe gives the greatest evidence for why all these ancient Sanskrit writings divide the hundreds of thousands of careers into these four categories. Because they show that if you're not situated in a career that matches one's proclivities and one's nature, one will be very unhappy and cause havoc in society. So there's two verses in the Bhagavad Gita, one in chapter 3, text 35, and one in 1847. They both have exactly the same two first lines. The third and fourth line in them differ. And they're making basically this point about do what you're supposed to do. Do what you're good at. So we can read them together. If you're able to read the Sanskrit, you can read that with me. Shreyan swadharma viguna para dharmat swanustitat swadharme nidhanam shreya para dhammo bhavayaha. We can read the English together. Don't jump into someone else's path, even if it seems so much easier and better than yours. It is better to endure the difficulties of your own path, because to walk a path meant for another is very dangerous. Swa means one's own. Dharma is one's duty. To follow one's own dharma. Pada dharma means the dharma of others. And here we're going to see at the end of the Bhagavad Gita, this is where all the teachings of the Gita are summarized. You see, the first two lines are exactly the same. Shreyan swadharma viguna pada dhammat swanustitat. But the last two lines are different. Swabhava means one's own nature. Niyatam karma kurvan napnoti kilbisham. And again, we lost the I on the it, sorry. It is better to engage in one's own occupation, even though one may perform imperfectly, than to accept another's occupation and perform it perfectly. Doing duties set by one's own nature, one incurs no offense. And this is an important point because Krishna also states in the Bhagavad Gita that every duty has a fault, just like every fire has smoke. But if one is doing one's duty, one's livelihood that matches one's nature, that's not considered a fault. One will not get a bad karmic reaction for the faults, because there's always some faults, for the faults that happen as just inevitable consequences from being rightly situated. So this concept of following one's own path, that each of us has a path. Now, such is true in the ultimate existential level. 100 people are following the same spiritual discipline under the same teacher, but each of those 100 people have a somewhat different experience and a somewhat different path. But even when it comes to livelihood, we each have our own path. And we may look at our path and say, there's this problems, that problems. The problems on our own path are more suitable for us. There's a very old story in the Jewish tradition of these villagers who go to the local rabbi with all their troubles. And finally he says, put all your troubles in a bag and bring them to me tomorrow. So everyone in the village puts their troubles in a bag and brings them to the rabbi's house the next day. And he says, okay, now switch bags. So everybody takes somebody else's trouble home with them. And after a week, they're all begging the rabbi, can I have my own troubles back, please? When we're going to be looking at what career we're doing or other major decisions in our life as well, this is going to sound very strange, but we don't want to just look at what we want to enjoy in that career, which is we talked about the 6 kinds of wealth. We talked about what we like to play with, but also what difficulties or sacrifices to us are worth it. What sacrifices and difficulties will we naturally and easily want to take up? Does that make sense to everybody? Just like at this point in my life, I've been in what's called the Vanaprastha Ashram now for 24 years. I basically travel without any fixed residence. So many people have said to me, well, that must be very difficult. But it's a difficulty that I generally enjoy because I'm enjoying the freedom and the renunciation of it. So the fact that I'm constantly adjusting to someone else's space and someone else's situation doesn't bother me very much. And it's like that with anything. You know, if you love taking care of your baby, you don't so much mind cleaning up the diapers or the nappies, depending on where you are in the world, what you call them. It's just accept that as part of the job. Does this make sense to everybody? Yes? If you're in a relationship with someone that you love, all relationships, by the way, have their downsides. You're not going to find a relationship where there's no difficulty. Good luck with that one. But if you really love someone, then the difficulties to you are not very meaningful. In fact, often we're happy to accept the difficulties involved with the situation that we love. Does this make sense to everyone? So often when we're looking at a career or a major life decision, we can say, are the difficulties of this path ones that I can embrace happily? That is the verse up in the room where I'm having my meals, Bhagavad Gita 4:24, that when one is in the proper consciousness, everything merges into transcendence. They're really, the difference between what I'm enjoying and what I'm sacrificing disappears. Everything becomes pleasure. However, if we're on the wrong path, that doesn't work. If we're on the wrong path, it becomes about, well, I don't like this, but I'm tolerating it to get some result, which might even be just a paycheck. If we're really on the wrong path, we're not even getting the 6 kinds of prosperity that we enjoy. Right? All we're getting is survival, like an animal. And if we're really, really on the wrong path, it's only sacrifice. There's no pleasure at all. So if we're like partially on the wrong path, there's this is trouble, I don't like this, but at least I get something. And if we're really on the wrong path, it's all misery. One effect of being in the wrong field is we have a feeling of being inauthentic. Now, even the best actors don't stay in character all the time. Right? If an actor goes home and they stay in character, it's a disturbance to everybody. And it becomes exhausting. Maybe we can think of a situation like that. We were in a situation where, we didn't belong there. We knew we didn't belong there. It's like, this is not my place. This is not what I'm supposed to be doing. We just felt really uncomfortable. And we were constantly having to pretend to be somebody that we aren't, and to act in ways that just are not comfortable for us. Like for myself, I'm a very big picture person. I don't like working. I can work with details for a while, and twice in a temple ashram, I was the treasurer. I mean, I did a good job, but it was killing me. I remember one time when the accounts were a penny off, right? And you got to figure it out, I was told. You've got to figure out where the penny off. And I'm like, really? It was just torturous. So that's the first thing that happens to us is psychological. And when we're in that kind of psychological situation, it's very hard for us to connect with the divine. In one sense, we can connect with the divine, with Krishna, with Bhagavan in any situation, because Bhagavan is everywhere and everything. However, if we're not properly situated, it becomes very difficult. It becomes like a phone that has a bad connection that keeps breaking, and you're struggling so much just to keep the connection. Now, another very interesting thing that happens in the first verse from the 3rd chapter of Bhagavad Gita, we had that another's path is called Bhayavaha. Bhaya means fear, and Vaha means a vehicle. Our work becomes a vehicle of fear when we're doing somebody else's work, when we're in the wrong field. So what does this mean? My own doctoral dissertation was on job satisfaction, and we looked at a model from Hertzberg where he talks about what makes us intrinsically happy with our work. And one of them is the work itself, the nature of the work. And then he talked about a lot of other factors, like the temperature of the place that we work at, the mood among the colleagues, how the supervision is organized. And he said those are all external factors. He said those are factors that don't make you happy in your work, but they can make you unhappy. So if your place of work is too cold, you may feel unhappy, but if it's the right temperature, that doesn't make you satisfied with your work. It can be bad, but it can't be positive. Now, what we've noticed happens if a person's in the wrong field, they're not getting satisfaction from the work itself, because the work itself doesn't connect with them. Again, it's like eating food that doesn't suit you, right? Eating food that gives you a stomachache. And when we're not getting satisfied from the work itself, we tend to focus on the externals. We tend to focus on how is my boss treating me, how much gossip is going on in the workplace, how comfortable is my chair, what's the temperature of the room, how much am I getting paid. The research shows that how much people get paid, once people are above, scarcity, once a person is not actually, literally in poverty and scarcity, that how much people get paid has nothing to do with job satisfaction, unless it's tied to advancement. So if money is a symbol of mastery and advancement, it's meaningful. But in and of itself, it doesn't give satisfaction. But if the work itself isn't satisfying us, then we may be focused on the money or on the benefits. And we'll start to complain. Now, this isn't right, that isn't right, that. The work becomes a source of fear for us. It becomes a source of anxiety for us. And I believe that there's a lot of people in the world now who are in this kind of a situation. They're not situated in a field that's conducive for them, that's in harmony with them, and so they're very much focused on the externals of their work, with a lot of complaints and angst about it. And then think about this factor in terms of connection with the spiritual, because spiritual is an internal state of consciousness. And again, we can access it in any situation. There are people who became enlightened in Soviet labor camps. I mean, it's not that there's any circumstance that prevents enlightenment and self-realization. But if one is in a work situation where one's consciousness is very outward to the externals and in a mood of complaining rather than gratitude, that's going to make it a lot more difficult to get one's consciousness in the right place. So we've looked at general things. Now we're going to look at very specific wrong combinations. And we're looking pretty much at all of them. Put it right here. Okay. We're going to look pretty much at all of them, though in one case we're doing a combination. So with the 4 fields of artistry, resources, government, and ideas, we're looking at how they could combine wrongly. Okay. And based on feedback I got from my first satsang, I put labels on each of these slides, but I did it just in the half an hour before I came here. So they're not all, like usually I like to put labels all in the same place on each side and all in the same font size and the same font, so they're not. So you don't need to tell me about that. I already know that that needs to be fixed aesthetically. Okay, first we're going to look at government and resources. If the fields of government and resources are crossed. So if people who should be in the field of government work in the field of resources, if people who should be in the field of resources work in the field of government. Okay, so let's look. Very easy to get out. Excellent. Thank you. Definitely improved. All right. So if we're going to, you guys remember this from math class? Or maths, if you're not from America? Okay, so what's the same about these fields? Anybody remember what do they have in common? Yeah. Both enjoy recognition. They're both about expansion. Well, these are more about people. This is more taking care of people, and these are more taking care of nature and animals. Although there's some little bit, because the government's also supposed to oversee nature and animals and plants. And resources is feeding and is providing the food and clothing and medicine and so forth for people. But the focus here is more on people, and the focus here is more on nature, animals, plants. By nature, I mean the soil, the water, the air. Yeah, the word in the Bhagavad Purana is thirsty. It says that these people are always thirsty. It doesn't mean literally for water. Anything else that's in common? Okay, what are some of the main differences? This is more narrow, yes. So this is broader and this is narrower. Now resources is broader usually than artistry, but it's focused on a specific flow. And this is on a societal flow. Yeah? That's okay. Okay, anybody else? Yes. Yes. So in the field of government, they run into danger. The firefighter, the police officer, they're running into danger. In resources, they first make sure they're taken care of. They put their own oxygen mask on first, yes. Yeah. It's probably going to be a little bit more practical minded, although they both have share the idea of practical knowledge more than theoretical knowledge. Yes. So this is the only field that actually creates wealth. And in this field, they collect and distribute wealth. Okay, there's others, but will serve us for now. Okay, we're going to look at when resource people go into government, and this is a major problem in the world today. They tend to focus on their own special industry. They don't look at the broad picture, they look at their industry. They want to increase the flow of resources to their own interests. Right? They're not working in long-term public interests broadly. The government can't shift responsibility to another entity. They have to look at everybody. Right? It's very interesting. There's a very famous saying by a former American president, "The buck stops here." That as the president of the country, I take responsibility, and our current president just said yesterday, I take no responsibility. So that's evidence of somebody who's not in the proper field, among many other problems, but who's not in the proper field. Because someone who's naturally in the field of government would never say something like that. They would say, yes, I have the responsibility for everybody. Whereas someone in the field of resources might say, look, I'm just responsible for, gold mining. Or I'm just responsible for corn. Right? I'm not responsible for everything. That's somebody else's responsibility. That's somebody else's responsibility. That's somebody else's. This broad to narrow. Now, in the field of resources, they may take a broad view of their area, depending on what level of leadership they have. But they can't think of society as a whole. Now, often when resource people get into government, they're thinking, while I'm in government, and we see this again a lot today, while I'm in government, let me channel the flow of resources to my own industry. So when I get out of government, I'll be in a better position. It's called the revolving door in government. So they're using government instead of for the helping the people to help their industry, feeling they're going to help themselves. Now again, in the field of resources, that's a very good thing. To want to channel profit and resources to yourself, you have to do that to make your endeavor sustainable. You can't work without a profit. But if you're going into government to make a profit for your own industry, you're causing havoc in the government. One very strong example of this is in making prisons privatized. So the interest of government in prisons is that people are getting reformed. If they can't be reformed, they stay in the prison. But the idea is that the vast majority of people in prison, you want to re-enter society as good people. Isn't that correct? Unfortunately, some people just figure you can't reform them. Now, if you have a privately run prison, you want as many people in the prison as possible, and you want them to stay there for as long as possible. So your motives are wrong. You're doing a government job, but with the motive of somebody in the field of resources, which again, works fine if you're working in the field of resources, but once you take it to the field of government, it's going to cause a lot of problems. You're going to want people to have longer sentences. You're not going to want to parole them. You're not going to have programs in the prison to help people become reformed. You're probably going to have very harsh punishments in the prison, a lot of solitary confinement. This is exactly what we see happening. All right, what about when people who should be in government go into resources? Now, people in government prioritize people over projects. That sounds lovely. Oh, they prioritize people over projects. How lovely. But when you're working in the field of resources, you have to prioritize your profit. You have to prioritize the project. Otherwise, the people you're employing and the people will be out of a job because your business will fail. the people you're serving will no longer get their goods because your business will fail. So if you're just always thinking about how to make all my employees happy and how to make all my customers happy, and I've seen this practically, people who really have a government mood. There's a number of examples of businesses that were started like an NGO, where people started a business with the idea, well, we're going to give sustainable employment to some people in a third world country. We're going to channel all of our profits into charity. You know, we're going to sell at the most baseline costs. And the business would either fail or be taken over by somebody in the field of resources. Right? So the government has the wrong, someone who's naturally in the field of government is just, let's just take care of people. Let's just give the people what they need right now. And they're not thinking about making the business sustainable and regenerative. They're not thinking of how to take the business through, as we talked through yesterday, the inevitable ups and downs of the natural world and the societal world. Now, another problem when government people go into resources is government people are very interested in justice, ethics, and fairness. Now, there is a practical ethics that's necessary in business, but it's very difficult to have the same level of ethics in business as one can have, at least theoretically, in government. It doesn't quite work. Just like I was saying yesterday, how I spent some time, which I did not enjoy, helping my friend in her cosmetics business. And they were selling a bottle of hand lotion for $20, and I knew very well it wasn't worth more than like $1.50. And you could say, well, that's not very ethical. You're charging people too much. And again, if you're in the mood of government, you wouldn't be doing that. But in the field of resources, you have to do that. Otherwise, you know, we couldn't pay the rent to the mall, right? You couldn't pay for the advertising. You couldn't pay the salespeople and so forth. But it really bothered me because I was helping her in sales. It was driving me crazy. You know, so I was going up to people in the mall and asking them to spend this $20 on this cosmetic that I knew wasn't worth $20. It was just like, I can't do this anymore. And so when government people go into resources, they tend to apply a particular system of ethics that isn't really applicable. They're going to look at customer satisfaction. You know, it's also very interesting that businesses that look at customer satisfaction, can they satisfy everybody? I mean, in government, you're much more trying to satisfy everybody. Not that you'll be able to, but that's much more the idea that every citizen, we were talking about counting the animals and plants as citizens, should be happy. But if in the field of resources you're trying to do that, you're going to go crazy. Isn't it? Right? I mean, I've had experience sometimes dealing with a business where I say, well, you know, I'm just going to write up a bad review. And finally they say, you know, just do what you want. Write a bad review if you want. Right? They know that they can't satisfy all of their customers. So it's a very different mood. And again, you have a problem that the business becomes not sustainable as soon as you're trying to please everyone. All right, now we're going to look at government and ideas. Well, it's a great pen, but it doesn't erase very well. Writes well, doesn't erase well. Or it's a bad eraser. My arm exercises for the day. Okay, I'm not sure if I should use the same pen or not. No, that wouldn't come off at all. It's a dry erase marker. We didn't have to erase that side because we were still comparing government. But that's okay. That's all right. Just keep going. Just finish what you were doing. It's all right. We'll live. That's okay. It's all right. Not a problem. As we said, it says in the Bhagavad Gita, in every endeavor there's some kind of fault. Okay, so we're going to look at the fields of government and ideas. What do they have in common? They're thinking about the whole society. What else do they have in common? Well, you got ethics and morals over here, really. And ideas, they're much more interested in forgiveness and mercy, which is a huge difference. Yes. So one is ambitious, one is peaceful and satisfied. So they're both systems thinkers. Yeah? Yes. Yes. So in government, more outward focused, and ideas more inward focused. More practical, and can be more theoretical. More what? They both use resources. Okay. So both are using the resources from the field of resources, yes. Okay, now again we have the running towards danger. Now, what do people in the field of ideas do? They don't run towards danger, nor are they worried about protecting themselves. They just have, right. Just have equanimity in danger. There's this saying, Mare Krishna Rakeke, Rake Krishna Marike. You know, if I'm destined to die, who can save me? If I'm destined to be saved, who can kill me? So the people in the field of resources think I've got to protect myself because I'm providing all the wealth for society. And the people in the field of government is I've got to go protect everybody else. And the people in the field of ideas are, it's okay, whatever. Yes. Yeah, so here money is coming from taxes and fees. And here traditionally money would be coming from charity. Traditionally, although at the present time many people in the field of ideas, like a college professor or a doctor, was going to be getting paid a salary. And even many people in the field of government are getting paid a salary. So in 2020 that difference is not that noticeable, but if we're going to go back a couple thousand years, the difference would have been quite noticeable. that generally people in the field of ideas didn't have a set income. Their income was more random. And you can see going through the fields, even in government, again, looking traditionally, if your income is a percentage of taxes and fees, that's going to vary on the prosperity of your domain. And resources, it's going to vary on the prosperity of nature and the rains and things like that. And then in artistry, it's going to be according to your patrons or your sales and things like that. But there's generally less and less surety as you go, as each field is more abstract than the other. Okay. Again, there's many more, but this is enough for now. Okay, what happens when people from the field of ideas get into the field of government? By the way, I've noticed that this can be a problem in religious or spiritual organizations that get big and that start needing government type management. But the people doing the government type management have the mentality of people in the field of ideas. Do we find in many religious organizations that people who do criminal activities within the religious organizations are not brought to justice? There's one big reason for that. If you have people in the field of ideas who are running the religious organization that's got big enough so that it needs government-type management, their mood is going to be forgiveness and mercy, and it's okay. And that's the mood of people in the field of ideas. That doesn't work if you're in government. And if you're working in a government situation, then that means there's going to be crime. If you're actually managing a country, then that means your enemies might come and take over. Oh, it's okay. Right? There's wonderfully a lot of very, very helpful talk in spiritual communities about forgiveness. But if you're in the field of government, internally you may forgive others for your own internal peace, but you got to get out there and punish criminals. But that's very unpalatable to people who are naturally in the field of ideas. It's just not something that they want to do. They just don't feel comfortable with the whole concept of punishment or fighting, or, they'll fight about philosophy in another way, but that's another thing. Another problem when the people who are naturally in the field of ideas go into the field of government. Generally in government, we talked about this a little bit yesterday, there's some esprit de corps, there's some concept of nationality. This is very much connected to yasha, or fame. There's this concept of community. And, we are good, we're Canadians, we're Israelis, we're Americans, we're Indians, whatever it may be. And to some extent, that's necessary. It's very difficult. People have to serve their country. They have to be willing to pay their taxes. They may have to be willing to be in military service. And so for people in general, it's necessary that those in the field of government bring out some nationalistic feeling. For people in the field of ideas, that's just silly. Why should we have any nationalistic feeling? We're all one. It's all a brotherhood. What is this? I'm Canadian, you're American, I'm Pakistani, you're Indian. It's all artificial. Right? They have this view of renunciation, and it's just difficult for them to lead the people that they're leading. They can't adjust to that mentality. Another problem when people in the field of ideas go into the field of government, people in the field of ideas often like to research things for a long time before they come up with a decision. I have a friend whose children, I have actually two friends like this, whose wife and children tell me they get very frustrated because whenever they ask their husband or father for a decision, he says, well, I'll think about it. And he thinks about it for a very, very, very long time. And sometimes by the time he's reached a decision, the decision point has passed. You can't do that in the field of government. You've got to be able to make lightning quick decisions without having to go through all of the research. So this makes people in the field of ideas, again, very uncomfortable. And they often don't know how to function in that field of decision making. All right, what happens when people who are naturally in the field of government go into the field of ideas? They can start bending knowledge for political purposes. In order to advance their own political agenda or their own nation, they can misrepresent the truth. And their own immediate needs are going to dominate over truth. Basically, they're going to crush truth, because that's not their main interest. If something's honorable, they're going to prioritize that over something that's true. And we've seen this kind of thing. We've seen government people who try to take over the field of ideas in their country. They try to take over the press, for example. There's a really good example of this. When government takes over a press and they skew truth in order to put forward their own political agenda for the good of the country. Right? That's how they're thinking. They're thinking we want to be honorable, we want to be patriotic for the good of the country. It's not a bad inclination, but when they take over the field of ideas, it prevents the dissemination of truth. Now, this is also a very interesting problem when people naturally in the field of government get into the field of ideas. In the field of ideas, there's what's called by Mintzberg, who's one of the leading gurus, we could say, of organizational structure and organizational theory in the world. And he talks about how different types of people have different ways of controlling quality, one could say, in their work. People in the field of ideas tend to have a high standard of quality by what he called mutual adjustment. It's not very hierarchical. People in the field of ideas tend to treat each other as peers. And they tend to have very flexible organizational structures. So who's in charge one day may not be the same person as who's in charge another day. But people in the field of government are much more likely to want a hierarchical structure. They're much more likely to want to have an org chart. Okay, who's in charge of what and who's in charge of whom. And they may impose this more rigid structure into the field of ideas. Now, what happens then is ideas get blocked, like there's a dam put up. The free flow of ideas starts to become hampered. Knowledge starts to become stifled. And I've experienced being in this type of a situation. Where someone comes into a field of scholars and philosophers and tries to impose an org chart. This person has to answer to this person for this, and this person has to answer for this. And everybody just gets discouraged and stops being able to function. When people who should be in the field of government go into the field of ideas, people in the field of ideas are generally energized by the wealth of vairagya, by the wealth of renunciation and equanimity, which doesn't make as much sense to most people in the field of government who are motivated by yasha, by fame, which in many ways is opposite. In vairagya, you may even withdraw from community, and you may not be so concerned with what people think of you. I mean, you may have your community of other religious seekers or other scholars, but in government, it's all about building community, and it's all about honor. And they may not be able to function in that field. It's like they're not getting their food. Also, people who are naturally in the field of government may be swayed by what's going to look good to people, what's going to bring them respect. And they may again skew truth for that purpose. And again, we see this. I think we see this in modern society. Okay, now we're going to look at comparing ideas and resources. Oh.
Just take out the whole thing?
No, no, here, just... Why not? Here. Just spray it on the towel and then I can put it in the right place. All right. Hopefully it's not a stinky chemical. Oh, that's better. We have enough airflow that I don't smell it, so it's all right. That's much better, thank you. Okay. What's the same? Yeah, not much. No, there is a concern about nature. For different reasons. Right? If we're going to look at this is for sustainable profit to benefit society, and this is for overall harmony. But yeah, they're both concerned about nature. Anything else that's the same? Well, a little bit in resources, but no, not as much as government. So you have some concern with Yasha here. And the people that are very high up in this field more. Now they're both systems thinkers again. Whereas this is for a specific flow. And this is for overall truth. Yeah, you have that. That's a way in which, yeah, you have this more interested. And here we have an interest in Aishvarya. Which also have a lot of opposites. Although you may both, one element of this, which is leadership, may be common. Maybe. Not always, but maybe. People in the field of ideas aren't that interested in the concept of growth in general. I mean, you can talk about they're interested in internal spiritual growth, but they're not like bigger, better, more, bigger, better, more, bigger, better, more. That's a resources and government thing. Bigger, better, more, bigger, better, more, bigger, better, more. In ideas and artistry, you tend to go more to satisfaction. I mean, you want to improve your craft in artistry. You want to improve the quality of your ideas, but it's more quality rather than quantity. So we could talk about that there's an idea for improvement, but this is more in quantity, and this is more quality. Now, I think both are interested in nourishing society. This more on the level of the body, and this more on the level of the mind and the soul. But both are looking towards nourishing. It's interesting, this particular dichotomy. There's a traditional ritual done in many places in India where a young baby, as soon as they can crawl, there's a cloth put on the floor and there's a pile of money on one side and a pile of books on the other. And to see where they go. Sometimes they have more choices. Sometimes they have choices from all four fields. But sometimes just these two are put up. Sometimes all four are put. Yeah, there's, for those of you familiar with the Mahabharata, when Arjuna was in disguise and he won the contest to marry Draupadi, and Draupadi's father wasn't sure what field of work this new bridegroom was in, so he put out gifts from all different fields, and he watched, and when Arjuna took the weapons, he was very happy. Okay, my princess daughter's marrying a warrior. Sometimes scissors, but sometimes you just see this too. Sometimes I've seen just money and books. You know, that these are often considered polar opposites. Yes, and sometimes there's a lot of difficulty in understanding between these two fields in particular. Leadership of wisdom and knowledge. You know, if you think about like leading scientists, the people who win the Nobel Prize would be in that sort of category. And I'm sure we can all think about past and present leading philosophers and scientists in the world who tried to be leaders and just or religious leaders. Yes, not leading people. Well, people in the field of resources, they may be leading people in their organization. You know, if they have a very big business organization, they may be leading people in their organization. Okay, what happens when people from the field of ideas, people meant to be in the field of ideas, go into the field in resources? So they're going to put truth first and have a neutral, detached perspective. But resources need something practical, right? And often these people will become disgusted with themselves because in order to work in the field of resources, they have to become biased. There's a book of history called The Alchemy of Air, which was how artificial fertilizers were first developed. And it's a fascinating book. And you can see very clearly how there were scientists who were naturally in the field of ideas that were pushed by the German government because of the war effort to run their scientific research as a profit-making business. And it was very devastating psychologically for these scientists. One of them, practically speaking, became an alcoholic. You know, he couldn't tolerate having to use his tendency to just research and look for truth to, all right, I've got to just look at the bottom line and profit. You know, again, we have a similar problem that we had with government, where people in the field of ideas, they have an idea of fairness and transparency. They may want to just give things away. You know, they're not really interested in charging the amount of money that's going to make things profitable. I remember reading this about many people who start bookstores. You can imagine that many people who open bookstores are people like me who, you know, if I was out with my kids and we passed by a bookstore, especially a used bookstore, Mommy, don't stop! Right? You can imagine that people whose homes are filled with books might want to run bookstores, but many bookstore owners go bankrupt. Right? Because their concept, they don't take all the costs into what are they paying for electricity, and when they, leave this book away for $1. And also people in the field of ideas are not into expansion. So they may love to have their own garden. They may love to have, actually this picture looks something like the garden I had years ago in Michigan. I had 3 raised, it's not a picture of my garden, but it looks something like that. I had 3 raised beds and I grew some flowers and some vegetables. But once it starts becoming an agribusiness, then they lose interest. I know of a situation like this, an unfortunate situation, with a married couple where they were growing some vegetables and keeping some cows. They had an ahimsa dairy, and they were selling ahimsa milk products to people in their community and living simply and making enough money to live, basically. And the husband wanted to make it bigger and more and bigger and more. And when a local dairy was going out of business, he bought all the cows from the dairy. And the wife just was like, we can't do this, it's too big. And she ended up leaving him. You know, that it was just a completely incompatible situation. So when people from the field of ideas go into the field of resources, they tend to want to keep things very small, again, not thinking in terms of sustainability, you know, not thinking in terms of taking care of the people that they're employing. Yeah? Yes. If you're in the field of ideas, and well, I'll tell you the way I produce books. So I have a couple of my books here in the boutique. I get donations for all the production. So the artwork, the editing, the proofreading, the layout, I get it donated. And if I don't get it donated, I don't produce the book. Then I do print on demand. So I have no stock of books. I'm not running a business. If a place says, you know, we want 20 of your books, I just have 20 books printed. And then I don't care. And it doesn't matter. And I also, wherever I go, I bring far fewer books than I think will be the demand. I'd rather not have to take books with me and worrying about unsold books. And I don't have to ship books to anyone. So I produce books, but I don't run it like a business. I don't even try to run it like a business. I don't try to make it profitable. It's just, my aim is to get knowledge out to people. And, you know, it's actually, the model I'm using is not at all sustainable or regenerative. At all. It's dependent on donations coming in for the next book. You know, and I'm just like, okay, Krishna, you want another book produced? Inspire somebody who's going to give me the money to produce it. And if you don't, and I'll just enjoy writing it for myself. So it's, you know, it's a very different model. What happens when people from the field of resources go into the field of ideas? And this is a real Indian pharmacy, by the way. We see a problem in the pharmaceutical industry where people who produce pharmaceuticals to make a profit distort the results and the testing of those pharmaceuticals. They're bending truth for profit. Now, if they don't do that, they may get discouraged by the lack of profit and the lack of expandability. It's like, well, they're just not energized by it. Again, they're not getting their food. Or if they don't get personal credit for things, often in the field of ideas, you don't care who gets credit. It's not that important. Whereas in the field of resources and government, it's really important who gets credit. And they may lose their impetus for work. People who naturally are in the field of resources going to the field of ideas may think a lot of the kind of research and study that should happen in the field of ideas is pie in the sky. They don't see the practical use of it. Now, one thing you notice when you're in a doctoral program is that the vast majority of stuff that's published in scholarly journals is only read by other scholars. My personal belief is that in academia, they train you to use vocabulary and sentence structure that's so awful. It's a pain for those in academia to read it. You know, you're like, do I really have to read this for the class? And for people out of academia, it's just inscrutable. So they're kind of walling it off from the people in general. And then there's, you know, some journalists who are trained in different fields who go through these academic and scientific journals and find something that would be of interest to the public, put it in layperson's language and publish it. And I think about thousands of years ago, these sages in caves in the Himalayas who were just talking among themselves about philosophy. And every once in a while, somebody would come from society in general and become their student for a while and learn something and bring it back to society. Now, if you're in the field of resources, you're going to say, what a stupid, useless waste of time and money. Why should this be funded? Right? Why should there be any government funding or private funding for people who do a bunch of research that they just share among themselves in their own incomprehensible to the public journals? Right? But without that going on, there's not going to be a generation of wisdom for society. So if someone from the field of resources goes there, they may stop that kind of thing. They just may say, well, we're not going to do anything like this. Okay, we're going to look at, for the sake of time, we're going to combine government and ideas and compare that to artistry. So what's similar with similarities between ideas and artistry is they're both what? Well, no, these are the most practical. Not necessarily introverts, but they both tend to be satisfied. Generally. Generally, they tend to not be as ambitious. Okay, and these people are focused on their craft, and then we have government and ideas focused on systems. It's more, it's stronger in artistry, though. It's stronger in artistry. You have, well, honesty is really for all three of them, although it's strongest in artistry to be honest. It's one of the most important dharmas of someone in the field of artistry. But it's certainly something that's more in these three than in the field of resources. Now, this sacrificing for others, is much more common to artistry and government than in ideas. You know, like artistry, you're making paintings that are in somebody else's house, and government, you're running into battle for somebody else, which generally is, that kind of thing is not done so much in the field of ideas. Okay. None of these three generate wealth. Government is collecting, redistributing, and mostly artistry and ideas are consuming. Now, obviously, everyone should give in charity, but your big charity givers are in the field of resources. Those are your big philanthropists are always in the field of resources. Why? Because in these two fields, they're not so concerned with having a lot of wealth. You know, they certainly give, again, everybody should give in charity. Krishna says in the 18th chapter, charity should never be given up by anybody. So that's for everybody, but that's particularly for the other field, for resources. Okay, in the interest, I'm kind of getting concerned about the clock. Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, time I am, and my co-author Ruchira likes to call him the time being. Okay. So if artistry people go into government, they tend to see a lot of the jockeying in government and the interplay of people is just politics in a pejorative way. Oh. And the realm of ideas seems so abstract to them. It just seems like people working on crossword puzzles. It's just like, why are you doing this? A similar problem you have with people in the field of resources going into ideas. Like, what is the point of this kind of thing? Now, this is very interesting. We mentioned, I believe, in the first session how there's more and more abstractions as you move from artistry to resources to government to ideas in terms of what is an ideal worker in that field and an ideal product. There's a very interesting book called Peak, which is about how you can become expert in your work. And it's a wonderful book based on very solid research. But one thing that I noticed is that it's pretty much exclusively applicable to people in the field of artistry, where the parameters for excellent work are very objective. And the parameters for excellent work get more and more abstract as one moves through the fields. So what happens when people in the field of artistry go into government or ideas, they tend to want to impose very objective standards in that field. So they tend to want to put a lot of detailed rules. This is how you do this, rules for the processes, rules for the result, which is what we commonly term bureaucracy. If people from the field of artistry go into the field of government or into the field of ideas, they will almost definitely turn their work into a bureaucracy. I've seen this happen. I mean, there's someone who's a friend of mine who is apparently working in the field of ideas, but definitely has a mentality in the field of artistry. The way this person takes to the scriptures is just rote memorization, for example. And it is rote memorize large portions of scriptures. And their whole emphasis is on, you know, let's make a rule book that's bigger and more detailed and bigger and more detailed, and anything that comes up, let's make a rule for that. Let's add a rule for that. Let's govern everything by rules, which of course stifles the flow of ideas and stifles the ability for decisiveness in government. Well, it's good that you're bringing this up. Government needs bureaucrats. In fact, all fields need bureaucrats. Well, we do, but we don't want to have a law for every detail of everything. You want to be able in government to respond to the nuances and the individuality of each case you're looking at. Which if your hands are, like there was that 3 strikes and you're out law, which I think was California. And so you had ridiculous situations where someone had some very minor misdemeanor and they're put in jail for 40 years. So it's much too rigid. See, that's fine if you're going to talk about how to hit a tennis ball or how to make a chair leg so it doesn't split. But if you're going to talk about how to deal with criminals or how to deal with philosophy and concepts, it's a problem. Now, people in the field of artistry assist people in the other 3 fields. And we need some bureaucrats in government, and we need some bureaucrats in ideas. But when they're actually managing the field of government or the field of ideas, they stifle it. There's a very famous book called The Fog of War, that when you're actually out fighting a battle, you have to make split-second decisions based on very poor information. People in the field of artistry just can't function in a high level of uncertainty. They're very uncomfortable. And in the field of government, you're going to often have a very high level of uncertainty. You have to make a lot of decisions very quickly with a small amount of information. And for people in the field of artistry, this is just torture. And again, what they try to do to avoid this is make complex bureaucratic procedures. How are we going to respond to each situation? When people who are naturally in the field of artistry go into the field of ideas, they're interested in the beauty and function of work, but not in so much abstractions. And they often miss the subtleties and the nuances in ideas and information. So they'll often present quotes out of context. And I think this is also something we see in the world. People who are naturally in the field of artistry, when they try to explain something about philosophy or something about science, they have a very hard time, as one of my granddaughters said, it's not all black and white, it's colors. And they have a hard time quite getting that idea. They're trying to make things work. They're trying to produce functionality. Right? And I find this is a very serious problem, this different way of looking at things. All right, now what happens when people who are naturally in the field of government or ideas work in the field of artistry? Well, people in the field of artistry often have a patron or they have customers. And this makes it very difficult for people in the field of government or ideas. They want a lot more freedom. They don't want to have to do things to please some patron or to please some customer. They want more autonomy. So often they'll be very uncomfortable. And not only will they be very uncomfortable, but they'll often become insubordinate. So if people who are naturally in the field of government or naturally in the field of ideas work in the field of artistry, they may just procrastinate, or they may be insubordinate or in some way uncooperative. They don't want to be in a situation where they have somebody that's telling them, okay, you know, I want the dress made like this, it has to be this size, and it's just not how they want to function long term. And they often find that they can't breathe practically, and they'll respond to that by becoming very difficult. And it's quite often when people are constantly procrastinating and insubordinate and not meeting deadlines that they're in a situation where they're out of their element. Okay, resources and artistry. And again, our second session today, I'm not going to do very much talking. I'm going to model for all of you how to use this information to come up with your own plan, and then you're going to work and come up with your own plan. At least that's the plan. If there's anything I've seen with this coronavirus thing is that we have our plans and God has his plans. Okay. Okay, comparing resources and artistry. What do they have in common? Well, I think everybody's working for the society. Yeah, they both work on practical production. and some very tangible. Okay, so the resources are generating wealth, and oh, sorry, put it in the wrong one. Resources are generating wealth and using wealth, and resources is supporting artistry, and then artistry is supplying the support for the whole society. So people and resources are often employing people in artistry, but people in artistry are supplying the support infrastructure. So they're both involved in a kind of support, although in quite a different way. Here we have the idea of expansion and quantity, efficiency, profit. Here we have quality, rasa, which is a taste of enjoyment, right? And a love of the craft. And again, we are running out of time. They're going to be more interested. People in artistry can be interested in yasha in terms of a community also, but they're not as much. Okay, what happens when people who should be in the field of resources go into the field of artistry? They automate it. They mechanize it. They make it efficient. They make it profitable. Plastic instead of metal and glass. Entertainment that has just lots of violence and sex instead of inspiring reflection through plots and character development. Drug-fueled sports that can make a lot of money. Right? They basically they take all the art and all the rasa out of artistry. They destroy the rasa. And of course, this is what's happened. The people in the field of resources running the field of artistry, and they've killed it. They're just killing the field. And one of the results of that is that in modern society, people aren't very happy because it's a field of artistry that provides all the rasa for society. We may have a lot of cheap stuff that does all kinds of cool things, but we don't have rasa. What happens when artistry people go into resources? They get frustrated because they don't really want to relentlessly make things bigger and bigger and bigger. They just don't have the urge for it. And again, they have a hard time making a business successful. You know, they're happy having a little bakery where they sell their own bread and like that, but they don't really want to have a whole business. But one of the most harmful things when artistry people go into resources, artistry people are not interested in the sustainable, regenerative nature of the field of resources. They're interested in what they can get simply without a lot of effort, which leads to practically all of the pollution of the world's environment. They're not thinking about the whole field. They're thinking about, okay, well, how can we just get what we need now? Which is wonderful if you have a little pottery business or you're a dancer, it works very well. But if you're running a whole business or a whole agribusiness and all you're thinking about is, well, let's do whatever's simplest and easiest, for the present. People in the field of artistry and the people ideas are both very present focused for very different reasons. But in the field of resources and government, you need to be future focused. And especially resources, you have to be focused on sustainability and regenerativeness. And people in the field of artistry just don't. They have a hard time thinking about that. They have a hard time thinking about the whole systems. So they go into this field and they basically destroy it. This is also what we've seen in modern society. So in summary, everybody's beautiful in their own place. One thing that we see with this Atmavan Manyate Jagat principle is that however I function, I tend to think everyone else should function like me. But if everybody else functioned like me, the whole world would stop. We can't just be a heart, or just be a stomach, or just be legs, or just be a head. We need to be a complete integrated body, and the universe is a complete integrated body. So especially looking at this problem of what happens when people are in the wrong field, what happens to the individuals, what happens to society, gave a lot of insight to Ruchira and I about why in these ancient Sanskrit literatures of wisdom, this idea of these four demarcations of work just keep coming up again and again and again. One might think, well, aren't these literatures all about enlightenment and detachment and spirituality and yoga? Why are they talking about four fields of work? And why four? Why not 10 or 100? And why these four? But there's a different dharma for each, that in the right place and done in the right way is perfect and beautiful. And as soon as you put it in the other place or do it in the wrong way, it causes a catastrophe. So it's 1:32. I'm only 2 minutes over. That's not bad. Although I did go a little bit too fast through the end. Sorry about that. So we have this wonderfully long break of half an hour. And then we'll meet again at 2. And we'll be putting together work from the 6 kinds of prosperity and the 4 fields. And we're going to go through an exercise. You're going to need to work with another person also to go through this exercise to come up with the top 4 or 5 things that are really important to you in career. So thank you very much. Om Tat Sat.